Welcome to Dead Headspace Spotlights. This is a mini episode of our normal show where we have a reading and a brief conversation. This is a part of Silver Shamrock's Horrorcast, a podcast network that includes Killing Time with Silver Shamrock and Unburying the Dead, where we exhume classic horror paperbacks for the new generation. I'm your host, Patrick R. McDonough, joined always by my co-host, Brennan LaFaro. Say hi, Brennan.
Hello, everybody.
And today we have Sonora Taylor. Say hi, Sonora.
Hello, how are you?
Pretty good. And for those first time listeners, she is, I think, third, not maybe fourth time on the show. She first came on with V Castro, and then we had a solo episode with her. So if you are interested in hearing more of us talking with Sonora, check that out. Just tell us a little bit about what you're going to read.
Well, I'm going to read the very first part of the first story from my new short story collection, Someone to Share My Nightmares. This is the author copy, so you won't have this stupid little strip over it once you order it. But I believe it'll be out by the time this episode airs, but it was released on October 19th. It's available on Amazon. It's also available through other retailers like Nook or Kobo. And hopefully by the time this episode airs, you should be able to search for it on bookshop.org or through your favorite online bookstore and access the paperbacks and potentially the hardbacks through their online portal. But if you look for it on Amazon, you will definitely find it in ebook, in paperback, and in hardcover, which is new for this year.
Yeah, it looked like you have a hardcover of it.
I do. I got myself an author copy of the hardcover, even though I have the author copy of the paperback. But the paperback is all marked up with where I made edits, so this one is my clean copy.
Oh, you know what? I gotta ask, is that a process that you do with other books?
Yes. My final edit is always reading the paperback copy that I order from, because I publish through KDP, Amazon service. And so they let you order proofs for a cost of printing. So it can be, pretty cheap. And so I just order one, and that's my final edit. When I read through it to catch any mistakes, I always catch at least a couple that missed, my radar, because like my editor says, you can read something 20 times and still have a typo on the first page. So
that's definitely true. You know what? Brennan, do you remember exactly what Philip Fracasse's advice was the first time he was on?
I was very similar to that. Just, paying a couple of bucks, $4, $5, $6 for the ugly tagged, version, even just throwing like a, makeshift cover in there. Because you're going to end up reading that different than you even would on a Kindle, and certainly than you would on a computer screen.
Yeah, I mean, most of my read-throughs are on the computer. I don't ever print out the manuscript, and no, small parks, I don't have a printer. But I do know people who print it out to read it. I believe my editor is one of them. She'll print it out, make edits, and then put the edits back into the computer, which is how she double checks. And but then yeah, I always want to read it in paper before it goes to print, and so that's what the reading the proof copy does, because then I can read it, and then I can also check for things like, is the spacing correct? Are the page numbers right? Stuff like that. Just the little things. Although it's been very rare I've had to send something about that. Usually the edits I send to Doug, who illustrates the covers as well as does the graphic design. It's always stuff. It's like, oh, I made this typo, Doug. Like, can you fix this? And, so I'm just hoping he's not like hating me for having to make all these edits.
I heard some other really good suggestions from this writer, Mark Cassell, and he was saying when he prints out whatever draft it is, he makes it a landscape orientation as opposed to like just one page vertical, and he divides it in the center, so it's like you're looking at two pages like you would a normal book, and he goes that way it gives you the visualization to kind of look like a real book. And I always thought that was a cheap and really a smart approach to do it. Brennan, why don't you take over, sir?
Yeah, so I mean, listeners are probably sick of me saying this, but I've been just on top of Little Paranoias for so long. One of my favorite collections, even a few years out. And one of the aspects I really liked about that collection, you definitely do to a degree in this one as well. When I pick up a Sonora Taylor short story collection, I feel like I'm getting a nice little variety pack there's always flash in there. There's a little bit of poetry, and there's some more meaty stories as well. So, this is 2 years since your last collection. Tell us a little bit about what went into curating this one, because you write a lot of short fiction.
Yeah, so this one was my first collection where the theme was decided before all the stories were in place, or at least the majority of stories were in place. Because Little Paranoia started initially as a collection of flash pieces I'd written for it's not Ladies of Horror Fiction. This is a Facebook group called Ladies of Horror Group that started years ago and is a labor of love from Nina Darkangela and other editors at Siren's Call. And they do, flash picture contests. And so I was writing a lot of flash fiction. I thought it would be great to collect it, as well as write new pieces or include some pieces I'd written on the side, as well as including longer stories that I'd written. So, that one just came together with less of a theme other than short and scary. But with Someone to Share My Nightmares, I deliberately wanted to go in and write about like the cross between horror and romance. Every single one of my books has featured at least one love scene. But this one, every single story, if it doesn't feature a love scene, there's some type of relationship or at least some type of romantic dynamic. I think the only story that doesn't have much of a romantic dynamic is Candy. But all the others have some type of coupling happening. Whether or not it ends well or not, you'll just have to find out when you read the book.
That's awesome. I love that, and I think I know the answer to the question, but readers who are looking for something a little bit more steamy, a little bit more graphic, I think there's one story you could probably definitely point them towards. And you released "'Tis Better to Want" as a Kindle single first. So was there any kind of trepidation on your part to include it in here, or was it just such a nice way to end it?
No, actually, in the end of the Kindle version, well, I think it was a Kindle version. It was the only released in Kindle. I actually mentioned that it was going to be in the book. So I saw it as a way to kind of, tease the book to new readers, perhaps, especially because I filed it under like romance and erotica. I think I listed horror as well, but I definitely was putting it in that section because, it was, it's horror in the sense that there's a demon involved. It's not scary at all, in my opinion. So it's definitely a bit more romantic. So,
You know what? You don't have to answer this, but I'm curious if you are comfortable to answer this, then go ahead. If not, I'll cut it out. But any thought of you and V ever writing a book together? Because like you two, I want to read that story, whatever it is.
We've talked about it off and on. I think it's just because at the moment we both have too many other projects happening that it just hasn't come into fruition. But it is something we've talked about a little bit here and there.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, she had a 2-book deal with, oh my God, it's slipping my mind. She had some big news, publishing news. I forgot who
I believe it was with Del Rey.
That's it. Yeah, she had, I believe, 2 books with Del Rey. That's awesome.
Yeah, and she deserves it. Like, she works so hard and her writing is so great. Like, I'm so happy for her.
Her reading at Scares That Care just like blew me away. She's just, you could feel her passion in her reading, but like hearing her actually read her words is, it's on another level. So speaking of reading, how about we get to yours and we can talk a little bit after you do it. Okay,
sure. So just as a reminder, I am reading from the first story in Someone to Share My Nightmares. And sorry, I should have bookmarked this. But the story is called Someone to Share My Nightmares. Start with the title story. So I'll just be reading from the very beginning, about the first 5 pages. And here's the book. It probably won't be on camera while I'm reading, but you can see it because otherwise I'll be like reading. But here we go. Okay. Kristen's favorite director was in town. He'd been there for almost a month, buried in a grassy knoll at the top of the local cemetery. His stone was the largest, a beacon whose notebooks, flowers, statues, and other items left in tribute cast a gilded shadow on the graves that were unknown to all except their families and friends left behind. Jonathan Ransom had not been born in Kristen's town. He hadn't even lived there. but he made sure he'd stay there in death, buried in Thornhill Cemetery in the small town of Creekwood, North Carolina. Ransom's films were haunting portraits of the South, bringing forth that unsettled quiet that most Southerners only knew as a feeling or a sense of innate displeasure with one's surroundings, a quiet anger they couldn't quite place. Ransom manifested that anger into ghosts, shadows, and monsters. He formed them into shapes, created characters that explained Kristen's deepest suspicions about where she lived. His work was celebrated across the country, and his last 3 films had each garnered more praise than the next. Ransom claimed that in Creekwood he'd found his muse. Its empty trees, barren even in summer, and blackened creeks that flowed inches deep brought a mood to his films that actors never could. Kristen knew those scenes well, had known them ever since she first entered the woods that Ransom found delightful. She always tried to see him shoot. He was famous for only shooting at dusk or at dawn, and in the quietest corners of Creekwood that even the locals managed to avoid. If she'd had the chance to meet him, she would have been able to tell him to avoid those corners. Ransom's death was called an accident. A local found him at the bottom of a ditch, and his head was bent in an unnatural angle against the stone. Ransom's camera lay shattered next to him, all the film exposed and ruined. No one would see what Ransom saw ever again. Kristen always knew there was something wrong with the woods outside of her house. Its trees bent at odd shapes, and they never seemed to bear blossoms or fruit. Yet they lived, year in and year out. Birds built nests in their crevices. Squirrels burrowed in their holes. Eggs fell to the ground before they hatched, and hawks left the bloodied remains of the squirrels on the roots. The forest's horrors began to appear in her dreams as early as elementary school. Kristen would fall asleep, and in her mind, she'd wander into a forest that no longer hid behind the trappings of flora and fauna. Between craggy trees stood corpses, their mouths frozen into a scream as their arms and hands stretched to the sky alongside the branches. The leaves on the forest floor were strewn with hair and teeth. Each nightmare ended with smoke curling at Kristen's feet and the glow of 2 eyes blinking in front of her. When she awoke in the safety of her room, she'd vow to stay away from such a dangerous place. And yet Kristen couldn't stay away. She'd walk by the woods and feel as if the smoke in her dreams were nipping at her ankles like a wolf puppy, welcoming her into its wild domain. And when she entered the woods, she felt an eerie sense of calm, like whatever had beckoned her was grateful for the company. She knew when she was welcome and when she should leave. It was as if the demon the eyes in her nightmares belonged to allowed her in so long as she listened to their whispers and left when they told her. All of his fans mourned his passing, but Kristen also mourned the loss of someone else, perhaps the only someone who understood those woods the way she had. When Jonathan Ransom spoke of the forests of Creekwood, it had been like listening to her own thoughts made clear. Whenever she'd shared them with anyone, they called her ridiculous or, at best, said she had the potential to write horror. Jonathan Ransom wrote horror, but what made his horror so compelling was his belief in it being real. Not a belief in monsters or ghosts, but a belief in something sinister, something made manifest in the limited ways people could see it. Kristen saw it in her nightmares. Ransom gave her nightmares life. Kristen knew deep down that the woods were the woods. She wouldn't give in to the seductive pull of the nightmare of the forest until she told herself emphatically that it was a nightmare, a fantasy she enjoyed the same as any horror film. It was her imagination, one that, until Jonathan Ransom took up residence beneath the grassy knoll at the end of Thornhill Cemetery, she thought she'd shared with someone else. But Kristen wasn't going to the cemetery today. She was going straight to the source of her current pain, the ditch that had taken Jonathan Ransom's life. She walked through the silent woods, quiet even though it was still the afternoon. She carried a rose to leave at the ditch. As she neared the site of Ransom's death, the silence slowly began to slip away. She thought she heard a rustling, but as she got closer, it became a trickle. There were no creeks in the forest, at least not close to here. Kristen entered the clearing where the ditch had once been. In its place was a creek. The stone that broke Jonathan Ransom's neck was now covered by rushing water. Kristen sighed. The rainstorms from the previous week must have left their remnants in the woods, or else the woods wanted to wash him away from her memory for good. She tossed the rose in the water, then walked away. She'd had enough of the forest for one afternoon.
God damn, that's good.
Thank you.
Seriously, bravo. Wow.
Thanks.
Yeah. Brennan, go ahead, man. I'm digesting it.
I was just gonna say that reading voice belongs in front of a campfire.
Yeah, right.
Good stuff. Now I'm curious, because I remember you announcing the title of this book long before it came out. So what came first, the title of the book or the title of the story?
The story in a way, because originally that was going to be a title to a longer piece that I decided to turn into a short story. And when I decided to turn it into a short story, that was when I decided to name the collection that. In my first time thinking of writing a collection of romantic horror, it was originally going to be called You Promised Me Forever, which is the name of another story in the collection. But once I came up with the title, Someone Share My Nightmares, and decided to turn it into a short story, that became the title.
Was it always going to be first? Because with Little Paranoias, that starts off with a little poem. That's your intro to the collection.
Mm-hmm.
Was it ever a consideration to have this one later on, or was it always going to lead?
It was always going to be first. I tend to want to put the title story first, even though I know that's not required. And I also thought it ended up working well because the story ends up being bookended by two very different stories, but about meeting demons. So.
Oh, nice. Brennan, was it you that said that comment about the Sonoras cover for this collection about the skeleton having sex with someone?
Oh,
yeah.
I forget. Oh, I think it was. I think her name is Miranda, but I apologize if I have the wrong person. But a woman tweeted on saying, "When does Sonora's book with the horny skeleton come out? Because that's what I need right now."
I think I made a similar comment about how it just embodies your style of writing. Horny skeleton. That's it. Spooky and horny.
I mean, the skeleton isn't the only horny one on the cover. I just want to point that out.
That's a good point. It's consensual, Brian. So
it is. That's very true.
Get that right, sir. You know what? I'm gonna jump away real quick from this collection to ask you before we forget about your anthology with Nico Bell. Can you tell us? Yeah. I can't remember when when it closes, so maybe
it closes December 31st,
and it's okay.
And it's called, for people who don't know, it's called Diet Riot, Fatter Punk Anthology. But yes, the submissions are open now, and they will close December 31st. So still quite a good amount of time to get something written, but yeah. I speak from experience. Don't let that time slip away, because once it's gone, you're writing in a panic 2 weeks before it's out and thinking, I'll never submit another story again, and then it's done.
That's so true. Yeah, you know what? That's absolutely true, because then you're like, it's 2 weeks and it feels like I'm back in college or high school or whatever.
Like, no.
Pat, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's excellent. So, Sonora, I was hoping you could tell us, you could tell writers what kind of stories you're looking for, and readers what kind of stories they can expect to get an anthology full of.
Sure. So I know the openness of this may drive some writers crazy, but the truth of it is Nico and I want fat positive characters. So we're really looking more at the characters than what type of story they're in, just so long as it's horror. So obviously we'll accept splatterpunk, but we'll also accept gothic. We'll accept haunted houses, ghosts, serial killers. Just what we're looking for is horror that features one or ideally more fat characters that aren't being at best pitied or at worst villainized for being fat. Like, because a lot of times fat characters don't get a good shake anywhere, let alone in horror. And both of us were just so tired of reading it in horror that we decided to deliberately create an anthology that is not only anti-fat phobia, but like just has good positive fat characters, or not good in the sense that like, they don't have to all be shining beacons of virtue. Like, this is horror, they can be anti-heroes. It's just they can't be coded as bad just because they're fat, like have someone, like, it's so common to have someone come in like so and so walked in the room, their breath was disgusting and their fat jiggled over their pants. I hated them, and it's sad how readily we'll accept that as like good characterization when it's not,
I totally
So,
get it.
Looking at you, Stephen King.
More authors than I can count, honestly. Like I'm not gonna put any on blast, but part of that is because I'd have to spend a long time thinking about how many times I've read it.
Is there any? I'm just thinking about my chubby belly now. Thanks, Sonora.
Huh?
Because you said the fat jelly thing, and I was like,
But see, that's not something that's bad. It's not inherently bad. I mean, I definitely wiggle when I walk, and that should not be a cue to someone that I'm a villain or I'm pathetic, Like,
I
should just
totally
be a
get
cue
that.
that I'm big. I'm a size 16, like I walk around and like, but I'm a person,
Absolutely. Yeah, that's I get where you two go. Or I can't talk today. I get where you two are going with that, and that's awesome. So good for you two.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything about that anthology that you would also like to talk about, or if not, can we get back to the collection without spoilers? Is that possible?
Sure, I think we can talk a little bit about the collection. And yeah, I mean, the most I can say is unfortunately I can't like say the URL to apply for submissions because it's very long, but if you follow either myself or Nico Bell on Twitter, we are intermittently sending it out. We'll definitely send it out more as it gets closer to the deadline. And if you search for Diet Riot, a Fatter Punk anthology, you should be able to find it. The URL is on Nico Bell's website, so you should be able to find something there. And then eventually I want to get it up on my own site, but I just did a bunch of updates yesterday and did not include that one, so I knew I was forgetting something.
Brennan, you got any questions about the collection?
I wanted to know just the process behind one of my favorite stories, which is the Sharps. Um, First of all, Doug did the illustration that pops up at the beginning, right?
Yes, he did. I can show that on camera.
Sure. While you're pulling it
And
up, I love the tease there because you open it up and you're like, what the hell is that? And the story's a little bit later in the book, so by the time you get there,
like, oh
you've done
shit.
some wondering, yeah, and then it well pops out at you. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so I originally went into it writing kind of I was just thinking of writing like a sexually charged creature feature, and then it became I mean, there's definitely still the romance and sex element, but it became more of a creature feature, and that was just part of the story. I recently described it kind of similar in vein to, even though this scene was important, it's kind of like how in Terminator, they take a break to have a sex scene between Kyle Reese and Sarah Connor, and it's important to the plot, but it wasn't like the whole movie was leading up to them having sex. In fact, they make it seem like it's incidental, so that it's like, oh, in fact it isn't, because that's where John Connor came from.
Yeah.
But regardless, what I mean by that is that the couple in the story, this isn't too much of a spoiler, they're flirting right away. That just came about like organically, but the main plot of the story is these creatures and they're trying to get off of the island and trying to figure out where they came from. And I just had a lot of fun writing it because I don't normally write creature features, and I watch them sometimes, but usually most of the creature features I watch aren't very good because they're on Mystery Science Theater 3000. I usually won't seek out creature features in theaters, but I do enjoy like some of the ones I've seen. I like the fun entailed with them because I realized I could just like make up a monster. And I mean, I wanted it to follow some rules, but I could also just like have some fun with this one, be like, oh no, now they're attacking. Oh no, this is happening, So I think that fun kind of translates through, in addition to the desire to put the eco slant on it for, I don't want to spoil too much, but it is a piece of eco horror as well as being creature feature. It's actually when slight spoiler here, when you read about a possible event towards the second third, it is based on an actual thing that happened in North Carolina. The creatures were not an actual thing, but something else was.
I definitely had fun. As odd as it never gets any less odd to tell a horror author that I had fun reading their book, but hey, when it's true, it's true. We were talking about V earlier. I think it's worth noting that she wrote a really excellent forward in there, just praising the living bejesus out of you. And I love it because, you know, we know from having you and her on together and from talking to you both separately that, you know, you guys have such an excellent friendship that developed, you know, an ocean away, and you got to meet each other at Scares That Care this year. So when you read that forward, there's just so much love and, you know, genuine appreciation of your work, but there's just so much love behind it. And you know, I'm glad you included it, because it's a real nice way to kick things off.
Oh yeah, and it was such an honor that she agreed to do it, because when I was putting together this collection, she was the first person I thought of course, be like, I'd love it if she wrote a forward, because she writes romantic horror, she writes sexy horror. I'm like, I would just be so thrilled to have her entering this collection. So I was really grateful when she agreed to do it, and you know, it just meant the world to me when I read her words. She really it raids with a lot of love, because she is full of love. She is one of the most genuine and nicest people out there. And if you know, she also takes no shit. I mean, you know, if you're in her corner, you're in her corner, but when you are, it's just like, it's wonderful. Like she's a wonderful person. She's a champion, she's a cheerleader. She reaches back to help people. She's great.
Yeah, no bad words are gonna come out of our mouths about her. She's a sweetheart. She's a sweetheart, and she writes some killer stories. Let's go to the final thoughts, Brennan.
Yep, sure.
Okay, Sonora, do you have any? Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, before we hit that, is there anything else you want to share about this your upcoming release?
Just that it's out now, and I hope you all pick up a copy. And I hope that when you do, and when you read it, whatever you think of it, please leave a review online after you do. That's very helpful for indie authors like me.
Absolutely, yeah. That's definitely worth repeating, probably in every episode. I never would have thought of it. And I mean, I've written my whole life, but if I wasn't a writer, I probably wouldn't think about it. Way to kill the room, Pat. So, final thoughts, Sonora.
I'm just thinking, like, yeah. I will say, like, you know, even the one thing I'll add is someone who I can't stand writing reviews. There's a reason I don't do it, and that's why I really respect people who do it. Like the two of you, because I can barely write a sentence. But speaking as someone who is not a reviewer by trade, that is what I do when I leave a review. I write a couple of key sentences. It doesn't have to be like, call me Ishmael when you're leaving an Amazon review or a Goodreads review. As a reader, you know, as a reviewer, review it however you want. But as a reader, which I am when I'm reading these books, I give it some stars. I sometimes put a little explanation, and then that's it. But all of that helps with bringing it to people's attention, because if nothing else, it shows people that the book has been read. Yeah. And by more than like two people.
And it takes 5 minutes of your afternoon.
Yeah.
So, readers, if you have read Sonora's book, please take 5 minutes of your afternoon and leave her some stars and a sentence.
How presumptuous. It could be their morning. So, Sonora, any final thoughts?
That was kind of one final thought there. I am working on the anthology with Nico, like I said. I've got some short stories out for submission, fingers crossed that they get accepted. And in the meantime, I'm just slowly working on my next projects. I'm trying to be a little nicer to myself in terms of giving myself time to get these done, because I have churned out 7 books in 3 years, and so I need to remember that it's okay to like take a little break.
That's a lot.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I should clarify so people don't think I'm like Stephen King levels of prolificacy. 2 of those books were like 4 stories long, but they were still writing, so
totally counts.
Yeah, it does. Brennan, any final thoughts, sir?
Nope. Thanks. As always, thank you for your time, Sonora. We love chatting with you. And now
Thank you.
we can add to our, kind of repertoire. We love hearing your campfire-esque storytelling voice. We will have to have you back for your next release.
Yes, definitely. Whenever that is.
No rush. Take your time.
Yeah, no rush, no rush. But I do promise it will be sometime like within the next couple of years. I won't like suddenly disappear like 10, 15 years later, no book.
Don't forget, where can people follow you?
So you can follow me on Twitter at Sonora Writes, and you can also visit me at sonorataylor.com. And I'm also on Instagram at Sonora Taylor.
Perfect. My final thoughts are, as always, we appreciate you coming on. Love hearing you now read on top of talking. So thank you very much, listeners. Please leave a review if you have read this book. If you haven't, please pick it up. It's worth your time. And as always, there are many choices in podcasts. Thank you for picking us.